Okay, so we're going to look at how to draw PERT diagrams. And obviously, how to draw PERT diagrams involves knowing some of the rules and terminology and symbols that we're going to use in these diagrams. So the first thing we're going to have to consider is that they're made up of two major components. So those components are going to be the activities and the events. Now, activities are action items. They are things that require the consumption of resources. So things like time would be an important factor to consider most of the time. But it'll be some form of action which there is a consumption of a resource that you want to minimize or maximize, kind of a thing. Usually it's minimized in this case because it's scheduling. And then you're going to have events which don't involve actions or the consumption of resources. They are more the start and end of activities. And when you join these diagrams, your activities are going to be represented by an arrow, and your events are going to be represented by a circle. Now, just a thing to note, if you go look at alternative resources, there may be other words utilized in regards to the arrow and the circle. So the circle is often referred to as a node, and the arrow is often referred to as an arc, a link, or an edge. So just be aware of that language if you're looking at alternative resources. Okay, now there is some other language you need to be aware of when we're going through this, which is going to help us lay out our diagram, and that is preceding events or activities. And preceding activities are activities that you need to do before a given event. Okay? And then you're going to have succeeding activities. And these are activities that can only happen after a given event. So let me just write down after a given event. So these two things are going to help you figure out the order of your diagram layout. So for example, let's just draw a quick edge there activity. And let's draw another activity that chills over there. And let's have an event sitting in between it. What you can see from this is that this blue activity is preceding the purple event, and the green activity is succeeding the purple event. So this is just going to help us, perform our structure and our order, because the arrows are going to be, where it's going to. So in this case, we have an event. And by the way, whenever you have an activity, there'll be nodes at the beginning and end of them. No matter what, there'll be a node at the beginning and a node at the end to notify you as like the end of the activity and the start of the activity. But the words preceding and succeeding are going to help just indicate the order that these activities are going to need to be placed in. Now, there are going to be a few other rules connected to the drawing of your activities and your events. So let's just discuss them a little bit. And to do that, we're just going to have to move our screen up a bit. Okay, so the first rule we're going to look at is if we have two activities that start at the same event, we don't want them to end at the same event. So we don't want a situation where we have parallel edges occurring. By that, I mean, here we have our starting event, and let's have our one activity, and then let's have our second activity. We don't want this situation where we have both of them going from the same start to the same end. So to prevent that, what we do is we still have them starting at the same event, but instead of having them ending at the same event, we create two end events. So we're going to, instead of having the one where they combo together like that, we have two end events, and then we create a dummy activity between them to, show that they are connected. So we have, again, if we have them starting at the same event, we don't want them ending at the same event. So we don't want this situation where you have like a parallel kind of line situation occurring. And then we're going to, so instead we're going to create an event here and create an event here and have a dummy activity over there. We can also rewrite it as we have our activities there and this situation with the dummy activity going in the other direction. But the idea is we're going to set up two end events and have a dummy activity connecting them. All right. The next thing we need to consider is we don't want a loop to form. So by that we mean we don't want an activity over here, say example activity over there, and we have this activity going to that event, this activity going to that event, and then suddenly we have it going back there. So we don't want a loop to form, because then that means there's cycling that's occurring. And that doesn't make logical sense when you are scheduling activities and stuff. You shouldn't be going around in a loop. Okay, so let me just minimize this so we see these two main rules. So these two main rules are going to be the fundamental components of when you're building up a PERT diagram, but there are other things to consider, but they are connected to this. So we are going to need to consider that there must always be a starting event and an ending event for every activity. Okay, so there must be a start and an end for every activity. So there must be nodes on either side of that activity. The activity needs to indicate direction. So what is the starting point and what is the ending point? And now what you're going to try and do is you're going to make sure that your arrows always point in the same direction. Okay, and that's going to prevent that looping situation. So notice here where we spoke about it and we said we didn't want a cycle to occur or a loop to occur. If we make sure that in our diagram, our arrows all point in the same direction, one, it's clearer for us to see what is going on. And two, it's going to show us when we are creating an error when a cycling situation is going to occur. So we want all our arrows to point in the same direction. So we want starting and ending nodes for every activity, and arrows always point in the same direction. In our diagram, we also only want our activities to feature once. So activities feature once only. And we want to also minimize the situation of dummy activities. So we're only going to use dummy activities when absolutely necessary. So in this kind of a situation where we have two events starting at the same node, we don't want them ending at the same node. That's the one situation where we actually want these dummy activities to take place. And a reminder that our dummy activities are going to be represented by a dotted line, and they will generally have weights of 0, which brings me to the point of the lengths of the activities is not a huge deal. So lengths don't need to matter, but every activity is going to have a weight associated with it. And that weight is going to be connected to the resources that we are modeling or investigating. So most often that is time. So each of the activities would have some weight connected to it. Dummy weights would be 0. Okay, and one last thing just to note, unless we're just running out of space here, there we go, is that when you're drawing your PERT diagram, there must only be one starting point, like for our overall network start, and one ending point. So when you're starting a project, there should only be one node where everything starts leading out from. And when you end a project, so all your activities should eventually end at one node. That's what we're referring to with a starting and ending point. So let's go look at just some examples so you can just get an idea of what's going on. Okay, so we're just going to go through some of the possible things that you'll see and the conventions related to PERT networks or diagrams. So let's start with just the basics of the preceding and succeeding. It's a very bad circle. Let's try that again. So we're going to have activity A, activity B, and we're going to name this 1, 2, and 3. So those are the events. So the events are 1, 2, and 3, and the activities are A and B. Now, if we look at this, we can say that activity A precedes activity B. And what that means when we interpret it, it means that B can only be started after activity A is finished. Okay, so activity A precedes activity B, so B can only be started after activity A is finished. So let's look at another example. So let's have an event like this, and let's have A sitting here like that with event 2. So we haven't changed anything in that regard, but let's add another activity coming out of event 2. So we have 3 and then we have 4. So we have events 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the activities are A, B, and C. I'm not going to write that down. I think you get the idea from the previous example, what are events and what are activities. But now what we have to consider is both for activity A precedes, and that's really bad handwriting. Let's rewrite that. Precedes activity B and activity C. So activity B and activity A, C, can only be started after A is finished, but B and C can start simultaneously. So they can start at the same time because they can follow event 2. So whenever event 2 is done and we add event 2, we can start B and we can start C. So they can be run in parallel when you're doing your scheduling and your events. So that's 2 items that can be done at the same time. Okay, so let's just move our page and let's do one more kind of example for you to see what's going on. Say we have an event over here and we have events over here, and we have this event goes to this event, and this event goes to this event, but there is a dummy event sitting between them. And then we have, this one goes to this event. And let's make that A, make that B, make that C. Event 1, event 2, event 3, 4, and 5. Now, what's happening here is activity A and B don't interfere with each other. I know we said that we should only start from one node, so pretend this is just a snippet from a network at the moment. So there are other things taking place somewhere. And we're just looking at this piece of information. So what is happening is that C can only start when both activity A and B are finished. So what's happening here is because it's in this direction and it's going up to there, and then you have C coming there. When you read this, you'll see here, let's just highlight it as well so you can remain thinking about it. So this C is dependent on this event 3. And this event 3 can only take place when A is complete and this dummy activity is complete. And this dummy activity can only take place when event 4 is complete. So event 4 can only take place if B is complete. So there you have the situation of C can only start, so C here can only start when A and B are finished. Okay, so let's make this a little bit more complicated now, just so you can notice the difference between the two of them. If I had to add another activity and put it through like this and label it D. Now, activity D can start when B is finished. So because the dummy activity is going in this direction, we don't have to worry about, A for activity D. So for activity D, it's just event 4 must be finished, and event 4 is dependent on activity B. So we only have activity B as a requirement for activity D. Okay, so now you may be wondering, because I keep numbering the events, how exactly would you number the events in your diagrams? So there is a rule that you can follow. So let's just go through that rule. So there is a rule on how we number them. And how we number them is basically the situation of we have our starting event, and we're going to label that one 1. Then we're going to label anything that leads off from that starting event, 2, 3, etc. We can follow the approach of 1, and that's 3, and that's 2. That's still not a big deal. And then only once we've done all the events leading off from this event, so once you've numbered all those events, do we proceed to the next level. And by the next level, I mean is if we had something coming from 2 and 3, for example, 2 and 3, for example, we would only look at these events once all of the events connected to the first one are covered. So all the ones that have activities coming from it are done. So you slowly level up as you go, and then you can continue your numbering. So the ideal approach would be, to actually go with, you've done 2 and 3. Then when you go to the next level, you make the 2 one 4, and then this one 5. Same here, it's the ideal situation would be 4 and 5 like that. So you would start with the lowest number and connect it like that. That part doesn't seem to be a huge deal most of the time, but in the end, your end event needs to be the highest number. So if you have an end event sitting here like that, for example, let's just draw all these arrows in quick. It needs to be 6. It can't be 5. It can't be 4. It can't be 2. It can't be 3 or anything. It needs to be the highest number. Okay, so your starting event is 1. Then you slowly go through the levels of, you look at all the activities that are connected to 1. You number their end events. Then you go to the next level and you number their end events and so on. Okay, so let's do another example. So in this example, we look for whichever one does not have a preceding activity. So in this case, it is activity A. So we're going to have a starting event where activity A is going to lead from. So we have the 1 and the 2 situation. You can leave your numbering for the last minute. You don't have to do it right now. So let's do it that way. And let's clear it up. So we know that A is going to be our first activity. So we write that in and we say A, and we know it has a starting node and an ending node. So we know that much. Then we say, okay, sweet, we've done A. So let's tick it off. And let's look at the next activity. So our next activity is B, and we see that it has a preceding activity of A. So we already have activity A on our diagram, so we can draw in activity B. So we're like, okay, so B is going to come after A. So let's just keep it simple at the moment and do that. So we have B and an ending event. And let's just tick off our B. And let's proceed. So now we're going to look at the next activity, which is C, and see what its preceding activity is. And you're like, oh, that's B. Can we draw that on our diagram? Yes, we can. So we can go ahead and do that. So C is going to lead straight from B. So we have that situation. And we can tick off our C activity. And we can continue down. So now we're going to look at activity D. And if we look at activity D, it requires activity A. So it doesn't require B. So it's going to have its own little event coming off of the end event of A. So something like that. Let's go ahead and draw it in. So we're going to have just some arrow coming out there, and it's going to have its own little end event with D. So just a note, one of the things that you can do is you can just make sure that when you're exiting your events and ending your events, to make sure that you can see like the order that they're in, you can do what I did not do here. So let's just redo this quick. And make sure that your end events are all in the same line, because that's just going to help you figure out your level and your orders. So we have D just chilling there like that now. So now we can tick off event D. And now we're going to go look at activity E. And activity E requires activity D. So it's going to follow from activity D. So we have this situation at the moment with E. Okay, so we can tick off E. Now we look at the next one, which is going to be F, and it has C and E preceding it. So now here is where we can consider the fact that if we have F, and F needs to come straight from E and C, you see that there's an issue because we want a situation where our activities only have one starting point and one ending point. So we need to fix our diagram here. So again, we have a situation where we have two starting points for activity F. We can't have that according to our rules. So we are going to fix it so it only has one starting point. So we're going to move our, let's just rub this out to make it easier for us. But basically, we're going to move our E to go to the same ending point as C, because we need a situation where our F has to have only one starting point. So if we do that, we fix it up like that, it can work out for us. So we make that still E, and then we can have F coming out so that we still see that we need both C and E to proceed activity F. Okay, so now we've done activity F. We can move on. So we're moving on now to G, and G requires D. So now we have the situation of we have another node coming out of the end event for D. So let's just here we go. And right, so we have G chilling there like that with an end event. So let's just tick off G. Now we're going to look at our H. So our activity H also requires D. So we need to consider that, and we have another one coming off it. And again, you want all your arrows pointing in the same direction, so you don't want to do that because that's not going to look correct. It's supposed to be going from, that level at the end of ND to the next level, which is sitting here in this region over here. So we're actually going to place our H like that. So we still have all those arrows going in the correct directions. So again, that was one of our rules. We wanted all our arrows to face the same direction. So we don't want it to face down. Facing down and up is more just for your dummy activities to make sure that you know your preceding activities are needed. That's why we're going to place it like that with our H there. And just by the way, I forgot to label this G. So let's just label it G there. And again, when you join this should be in a line. I know my lines aren't that great, but close enough. Okay, so now we have our H covered. So let's just tick off our H for a second and let's move on to our I. And our I needs an H preceding it. So now we're going to put I there. Okay, and we've done I. So let's go on. And if we go on, we are back to technically supposed to be pink, but I think I lost track of the color order here. So let's just use purple. J, and it has H preceding it. So we're going to have another node coming out of H, another edge coming out of H. And it is going to be, again, we want it to be in the correct order. So let's just make it over there. And let's just call it J. And at the moment, it has an end like that. Okay. Next up, we're going to have K. And K requires both F and H. So this one's quite interesting, and you can see our diagram is looking a bit messy now. So we may want to just neaten it up a bit so we can have something that connects both our F and our H. But technically we can add a dummy activity. And this is what I mean by it's going to look messy at the moment because the dummy activity is going to be something like that. And then we can add in our K with an end chilling there like that. So again, it looks really messy right now. So we are going to want to neaten this up after the fact. But let's just continue for the last bit before we work on making it look prettier. So now we have L and L. And that has G and J preceding it. So L needs G and J. Which means that these two nodes that we have here that represent the end of G and the end of J, so this one over here and this one over here, remember when we have a node, an edge activity, our edge activity must only have one starting node. So these two should be combined. So we're going to have to move things around a little bit to make it easier for us to actually connect the two. So we are going to have to erase one of these here. So let's erase J because it's in a messy position anyway. And let's connect it on this side. So we're going to have, again, it comes from our end H node of J, and let's also erase this node and just extend it. So it looks a little bit neater. So we're extending it, and we have an end node for both of them sitting there like that. And now we can take and make L exit it. So now we're going to have L and an end node. We're not finished here. So remember, our last and our final, nodes should only be one. So we have an end node here, an end node here, and an end node here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to combine all of those and neaten it up as well. So we're going to have a new end node sitting here like that. And we're going to just readjust our lines. So that's going to be L. Let's rub out the old L. And then we're going to extend the I. We're just going to extend it like that. And then we're going to move our K. And again, we're doing this to keep all our rules taking place correctly. And don't forget, this is an actual activity, so it should be in the proper clear white. So it should actually be dotted like that with that happening. So now we can number them. And when we number them, you go, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5, that's 6. And then we go, that's 7, that's 8, and that is 9. It would be a little bit clearer to see the numbering and what's going on with the numbering if you just neaten up your diagram. So let's neaten it up a bit so we can see things a bit clearer. So I'm just going to draw it at the top here so that we can see what's happening and how we can neaten it up to make it a little bit easier to look at. So we're going to have activity 1 with A. And A obviously ends at activity 2. Then we're going to have B and D. Because we now know there's 2 activities, we can, give them a nice little bit of space to do their own thing, B and D. And they have end activities. Then we know that activity B only has one activity coming from it, so we can just, keep a straight line situation there. Okay, with C. And that's still 3 and 4. But now we know that D has 1, 2, 3 activities leading from that event 4. So we can space it out to, allow that to happen without being messy. So we have that one happening there like that. We still have this one coming through here. And it's going to be activity 6 there. So that's 5 and that's 6. And then we know that G is going to meet up with J. So we know that there's going to be an activity coming through, but it's actually going to require another activity coming through from here. So we're going to place it somewhere around there instead, so that we can see the order of how things are going to play out. So you needed activity H here. This was activity E, and this is activity G, and this is going to be activity J, which leads after H. So that's where the layering effect happens. And now you know that activity C only has one succeeding it. So that's going to be F. And again, that's why that's 7, and this is going to be 8. We also know that there is a dummy activity between these two sitting there like that. And then we know we still have activity I coming out there. And we have this one and this one taking place. So let's just neaten it up. I know it's not super neat. My hand is shaking, but you get the point with the K and the L. So when you join this, if you can see, and you can actually count it when you join the diagram as well, so you can investigate the table and actually see how many activities are preceding or succeeding an event. And if you can see how many activities are succeeding the event, you can plan appropriately when you're joining the diagram, and so that you can get, a slightly more spacious feel coming out of it, like if you had to do it for the top one there. So the bottom approach, I'm not thinking things through. I'm just writing things down and drawing it out and then fixing it up afterwards. But I could have followed the approach of actually reading my entire table, figuring out how many, activities succeed the activities on this side, so that when I draw my plans, I can make sure that they're nice and spacious to allow for all the information to be seen clearly.